The Ottawa Pride parade was cancelled after anti-Israel activists blockaded the march.
Most of Alberta's 44 First Nations have not publicly released financial audits for several years.
A BC Court of Appeal overturned a lenient community-based sentence for a non-citizen who allegedly stabbed a stranger without provocation. Hello Canada, it's Tuesday, August 26th, and this is the True North Daily Brief. I'm Cosmin, Dzsurdzsa.
And I'm Geoff Knight.
We've got you covered with all the news you need to know. Let's discuss the top stories of the day and the True North exclusives you won't hear anywhere else. Anti-Israel activists blocked the Capital Pride parade in Ottawa, causing it to be called off after 90 minutes. The activists insisted that Ottawa's mayor publicly back their group or else be barred from participating. Queers for Palestine Ottawa, the group responsible for blockading Sunday's Capital Pride march, asserted they had permission from Capital Pride's Grand Marshal Patience Plush to halt the event. The group claimed Plush invited hundreds of anti-Israel LGBT activists to participate in the march. According to an Instagram post on Sunday, the group's demands were that Capital Pride be, quote, transparent to the community about the commitments they have made and about their pro-Palestine values, and that Mayor Mark Sutcliffe apologized for boycotting Capital Pride last year and for the mayor to, quote, pledge his support to their anti-Israel movement. Last year, Capital Pride, a group supposedly centered around LGBT rights and advocacy, pledged to boycott Israel in support of the Palestinian boycott, divest, and sanction movement. At the time, Sutcliffe vowed not to go to the march in support of the Jewish community who were being excluded. The Liberal Party of Canada and several other major institutions also joined last year's boycott of Capital Pride due to the organization's geopolitical stance. Sutcliffe released a statement Sunday admonishing Queers for Palestine for disrupting the event. He said in a statement, quote, "It's deeply regrettable that a group of activists chose to block the parade, ultimately leading Capital Pride officials to cancel the event. My heart goes out to many people in our city who were deprived of the opportunity to participate in this celebration of joy, resilience, and community." Emily Quayle, who identified herself as the sole negotiator with Capital Pride on behalf of Queers for Palestine Ottawa, said the march would not have been cancelled had Sutcliffe capitulated to their demands.
Mark Sutcliffe had two choices. He could have left the parade without talking to us, refusing to take a stand with solidarity with us, with the Palestinian people, a stand against genocide. Or he could come talk to us and apologize for last year's boycott and understand that if he's marching in a parade led by a Grand Marshal who has invited Queers for Palestine to join them at the front of the parade, then maybe he should recognize that that is in fact the parade he is in. Him choosing to leave, to acquiesce to Capital Pride's false and arbitrary 20 minutes allowed for a disruption before they dispersed the parade, meant that the mayor chose to disperse our Pride parade rather than talk to the people leading the parade.
So, Geoff, I don't think this is the first case where the Pride movement tried to do a march and it was derailed due to these geopolitical issues and the certain perspective that dominates the left side of the equation. Has there been any pushback from LGBT people just in general about these events being hijacked? And what are some of the critics of these demands and this particular happenstance saying?
Yeah, Cosmin, some LGBT community leaders in Ottawa have privately expressed frustration to local media outlets, indicating plans to hold a separate event to reclaim the spirit of Pride, though no official announcements have been made so far. Critics from Jewish advocacy groups, such as the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, have issued a statement condemning Queers for Palestine's actions, arguing that the blockade alienates Jewish LGBT members and contradicts the inclusive ethos of Pride, according to a press release on August 25th. Social media analysts by independent researchers show a spike in hashtags like hashtag Pride Not Politics, with over 1,200 posts since the cancellation, reflecting growing discontent among diverse Canadians who feel the event was derailed by geopolitical demands. Legal experts, including University of Ottawa professor Charisma Mathen, whose work focuses on constitutional law, suggests that municipal bylaws governing public gatherings could be relevant to assessing the legality of such disruptions, based on her prior analysis of protest regulations. Nearly a decade after the federal government suspended enforcement of Canada's Indigenous Transparency Law, most Alberta First Nations have ceased publicly publishing financial audits. According to federal records reviewed by True North, 13 of Alberta's 44 First Nations have not posted an audited financial statement since at least the 2020 to 2021 fiscal year. Some bands, such as Tsuut'ina Nation, haven't filed a public audit since 2014 to 2015. A few bands have never filed an audit. Only 11 of Alberta's 44 bands have posted an audited consolidated financial statement for the 2023 to 2024 fiscal year. Passed in 2013, the First Nations Financial Transparency Act requires bands to publish their audited financial statements and the salaries of chiefs and councillors. However, in 2015, the Trudeau government announced it would no longer enforce the law, stopping all court actions and reinstating funding withheld from non-compliant bands. No replacement framework has been introduced since, despite the federal government saying in 2017 that it would work with First Nations to develop a new approach to encourage financial transparency and accountability. Gage Hobrick, Prairie Director of the Canadian Taxpayer Federation, said the federal government no longer enforcing the FNFTA is very unfortunate. He explained that in non-Indigenous communities, any citizen can access basic financial data like budgets and salaries on a government website. He said, quote, "It's the most basic part of transparency that we expect from governments of all levels, and First Nation communities shouldn't be left out of that." Hobrick added that by not enforcing the act, regular band members are hurt by the lack of transparency. He said it becomes much more difficult for band members to ask important questions about where community money is going, while some communities struggle with addiction and poverty. So, Cosmin, the Liberals have not been enforcing these audits since 2015. What are some of the things that people who are calling for a reversal of the Liberal decision saying?
Well, I think what people are asking for is to get rid of this double standard and to hold First Nations to the same standards that everybody else, particularly governments, are held to when it comes to financial transparency. Governments, provincial, municipal, federal, are required to expose their spending, detail how much people are getting paid, etc. And it's sort of ridiculous that we have this piece of legislation, the First Nations Financial Transparency Act, in effect, but it's not being enforced. What is the purpose of this law if the Liberals choose to suspend its enforcement and are just keeping it on the books for what reason? I assume it has something to do with it's probably not going to be politically popular for them to get rid of this particular law, because I think most Canadians would agree with the spirit and intent of the legislation to require some amount of financial transparency from First Nations. And perhaps the Liberals just don't want to open that can of worms by revisiting this. But, you know, I will add that it's commendable that there are First Nations governments that are still choosing to follow this act, even though they're not required to, which means they're going the extra step to at least inspire confidence in their own governance. And it just does a service not only to taxpayers, but to their own band members. And it really helps set the standard, which should be obliged by all First Nations, that you should be transparent and accountable in how you deal with your finances, especially due to the fact that they get boatloads of money from Canadian taxpayers. British Columbia's Court of Appeal has overturned a lenient community-based sentence for a man who stabbed a stranger without provocation. In a decision released Friday, a 3-judge panel allowed a Crown appeal and imposed a 42-month prison term on Jae Won Lee, 24, for aggravated assault and possession of a dangerous weapon, less than 102 days credit for time served. The ruling stems from a March 16, 2024 incident in Surrey, BC, where Lee, then 23, confronted a middle-aged man who was smoking outside his housing complex. According to court documents, the victim questioned Lee about why he was touching a neighbor's parked motorcycle when Lee produced a 6-inch knife and told the victim, quote, to mind his business. As the victim was walking away, Lee stabbed him in the arm, chased him into the building, and stabbed him again in the abdomen. The victim required 18 stitches for his arm and 50 staples to close the abdominal wound. Lee then told the victim to get on your knees and say you're sorry, according to court documents. Lee, a permanent resident born in Australia who moved to Canada at 8 years old, pleaded guilty. Provincial court judge sentenced him in April to 2 years less a day under a conditional sentence order to be served in the community, followed by 3 years of probation. Lee's background included a youth criminal record for weapon possession and breaches, and an adult conviction 2 months before the stabbing for wielding a switchblade on a SkyTrain, threatening a friend and a passenger. This seems like a pretty light sentence for such a serious incident. Geoff, is there any reason why this guy was given an easier sentence?
Yeah, the initial lenient sentence of only 2 years less a day under a conditional community order for Jae-Won Lee was influenced by the provincial court judge's consideration of his immigration status as a permanent resident, with a fear that his prison term might lead to deportation to Australia, of all places, as noted in the BC Court of Appeals ruling. It's kind of ridiculous to think of Australia as a factor in this case. It might be known for having some poisonous spiders and snakes, but it's a peaceful first world country, and in my opinion, having visited there recently, it's one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen. It's hardly a place to fear being deported to. However, the judge probably weighed in on the potential disruption to Lee's life and his family ties here in Canada, where he's lived since age 8, against the severity of his unprovoked stabbing, opting for a lighter sentence with those factors in consideration. This decision also reflected a broader judicial trend of factoring in collateral immigration consequences overall, despite Lee's prior youth and adult criminal record, including weapon possession, which the appeal court later deemed insufficient to justify leniency given the violent nature of the attack.
That's it for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in. You can stay on top of new episodes every weekday by subscribing to the Daily Brief on iTunes and Spotify. Also, while you're at it, make sure to hit us with a 5-star rating and please leave a review.